The 1950s was full of exploding culture. Life in the 50s was somewhat simple in comparison to our current lifestyle. The 1950s was the post-World War II decade. Everyone was starting new after the war. Veterans returning home from World War II started families, thus creating the baby boom generation. Generally, children obeyed their parents. Girls were expected to be ladylike, and boys were expected to act like gentlemen. Women stayed home and cared for the children and did the housework, while men went to work every day to come home to a dinner on the table. Daily life was somewhat stable and predictable. The 1950s was a decade of transitions in culture and race. Activities in the 1950s set the stage for the civil rights movement in the 1960s. For example, segregation was a big issue in the 1950s. It was in 1955 when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat and moved to the back of the bus. In the early 1950s, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional for there to be segregation in schools, thus setting the foundation for the desegregation of schools in the later decades. Life in the 50s was good for some and filled with tension for others. For fun, people in the 50s went to drive-in movies, dances, community concerts, and organized sports. On the hot summer nights, families would gather around the radio and listen to their favorite sports teams. Or, if they had a TV, they would watch one of the two channels that was available, along with the occasional card or board game. Sandlot baseball games were also very common. The event that set the 50s apart from other decades was cruising. Cruising is when a bunch of teens go out on Saturday nights with a car full of friends and drive around and hang out with other cars full of people. Popular television shows were I Love Lucy, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and Superman. Sock hops and dance hops and hula hoops were also very common. Popular slang words were squares, chicks, beat bop, threads, neen, backseat bingo, kill, and cat. Another big event in the 1950s was the availability and affordability of the black and white picture TV in the homes of common people. Although the TV was invented before the 1950s, it became popular and more affordable in the 50s. With the rise of the number of households with TVs, the television became the #1 source of news, information, and entertainment. Several things that are currently common today had their beginnings in the 1950s. The first credit card was invented in the 1950s. The credit card was only available for the wealthy. Also, the first videotape was invented, opening a new way of recording. The transistor radio was also invented, which was the first handheld radio. In 1958, the computer was invented. Finally, in 1959, the microchip and the Barbie doll was invented. Can you imagine life without credit cards, videotapes, handheld radios, computers, and Barbie dolls? Income and the cost of living was significantly less than today. In the 50s, the household income and the cost of goods was much less. The average income in the 50s was $2,900 a year. The average house cost was about $14,500, whereas today it's about $290,000. In the 1950s, gas cost 20 cents a gallon, bread cost 14 cents a loaf, and steak cost 77 cents. Postage stamps cost 3 cents, and a gallon of milk only cost 20 cents. Another important part of the 50s were the baby boomers. A baby boomer is a person born post-World War II, 1946 to 1964. Many of the baby boomers were born in the early 1950s as soldiers returned home, married, and had families. Because of this expansion of children, many new schools had to be built, as well as other public service buildings and facilities to make room for the growing population. With so many children, there is a large market for toys. The toy makers were able to make and sell many new toys. As a result, the baby boomers helped the economy in the early 1950s and continued on. The 1950s saw huge industrial booms in America. Less skilled people of lower economic status could improve their standards of living by working in factories manufacturing small components to large cars and airplanes. People also worked in banks, real estate, and law practices. Employees did not move from company to company or job hop. as they do today. It was more common to work for a big company and stay there from the time you started until the time you retired. These people were known as company men. These people got one entry-level job and moved up with a corporation. Teenagers also worked. They could get jobs in restaurants or soda shops or work for their parents. A lot of people owned small businesses. It was common for a teenager to work for a friend or extended family member if they owned a business. There are also jobs for teens in bowling alleys, movie theaters, and stores. Finally, the music of the 50s was the foundation for our music today. Prior to the 1950s, music was mostly big band sounds with singers, orchestras, or brass bands. The music of the 1950s evolved to smaller bands with amplified guitars and drums. Consequently, the 50s was known for the birth of rock and roll. In 1955, the song "Rocking Around the Clock" became very popular. The feel-good, innocent, of-a-lot music of the 50s reflects the post-World War II optimism in America. Elvis Presley and the Beatles were part of the 50s music. The 50s was a decade of cultural change, new inventions, new music, and so much more. Now let's listen to the music and view the sights of the 1950s.
6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, a rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, a rock. We're going to rock around the clock tonight. Glad on. Join behind. We'll have some fun when the clock strikes 1. We're going to rock around the clock tonight. We're going to rock, till broad daylight. We're going to rock around the clock tonight. When the clock strikes 2, 3, and 4, if the band slows down, we'll yell for more. We're going to rock around the clock tonight. We're going to rock